Good morning, everybody. Hold on, I've got myself a little. There we go. Hello, how are you? I said good morning, but I should really say good evening and good afternoon. Hello, wherever you are in the world today. We're so excited to have you join us for our gift, Global Innovation and Futures in Teaching, LFC, which is part of our Possible Education Futures Lab. Sorry, yes, labs, PEFL's structure. So, as we have been working through this year, we have been providing sessions around different research approaches and storytelling, as is the case today, to help our um, gift members and PEFL participants think about the way they share their work and collect data to do so, to amplify the experience that we're having, educationally speaking, across the globe. So today's presenter, I'm so excited, is Dr. Tara Nkrumah. She is one of my assistant professors in the Division of Advancing Educator Preparation. She'll be the only one of the four that actually lives in DEP as far as her academic home. Her work has been transformative in thinking about science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM education, particularly for young girls in young girls of minoritized backgrounds. And so, really helping to open up the STEM world, the importance of culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy and leadership for them, for all learners really, but focusing on young girls and their future. So it's super exciting for Dr. Nkrumah to talk about her work, what she has done with the Theater of the Oppressed, but also the storytelling work that she does to help people find their voice and share that voice with the world, because it is oftentimes, at least in my experience, a missing piece of the story that people need to know. So without saying too much more, Tara, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Nicole, for the wonderful introduction. I am so excited. Y'all, I'm super animated and I don't have caffeine, so just get ready. We're going to have a good time together. I appreciate and thank you, Tanya, for this opportunity to speak to everyone about my storytelling research background, but don't think I'm going to be talking at you. You're going to have to do some work here, so be ready. Today is going to definitely be an interactive conversation. And here's my thing, it's going to be fun. You got to have fun with everything you do. And so before I begin, I don't want to assume that no one is doing storytelling as a part of their research. So if you could just kind of share with me, either by a reaction button, if you are in the practice of using storytelling as a qualitative technique for your research. Are there any in this group that use storytelling? Okay.
I have in the past when I was more research active than my role currently allows.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm assuming no one has. And so again, if at any point you want to speak out or share, this is your time. I want a two-way conversation. So I'm going to just share my screen just a second. And again, guys, this is conversational. I am not bothered by silence. I do know how to wait. I have the award for the stare down, so I can stare at you and be okay. So I promise you, I'm totally relaxed, and your silence is not going to bother me because I figure you're just processing and thinking about what you're going to say. So I am going to speak to you about storytelling. I'm going to talk to you more specifically about the creative practice of using storytelling within research for qualitative practices. So we're going to do a little warm-up activity. So I've presented three different images here for you using the theme of storytelling. And these are meant to be prompts. I have no connection to any of these pictures other than I just randomly picked them off of the internet. And so I would like for you to just take a moment and look at the different pictures that I have. A, kind of representing a celebration. B is an image of someone purchasing a home, or C, packing for a trip. And I'd like for you to just think about these different topics and see if you can recall a time in your life, an event that happened that kind of represents one of these. And if you could just briefly share the story behind it for us. So I'm going to give you a moment, look at these images. What comes to mind? And please unmute yourself and share briefly the story that goes with one of the themes. Even though we're sharing stories as a qualitative researcher, these stories are more meaningful. We don't just hear them as anecdotes. We are using those stories to kind of reveal things about the person's culture, thinking about their experiences, and certainly what makes up their identity. And so, in sharing these stories as we go throughout today, they are for a deeper meaning to help us recognize the work of qualitative research when we're dealing with this whole thing of storytelling. So, my overview of my presentation is in like four different parts. I'm going to talk a little bit about researcher positionality and give you some of the different types and techniques of storytelling, and then definitely kind of share in a little bit more detail of the different ways and methods that are used to go about storytelling. And then you guys get to do a little practice activity. So there's a lot for us to do today. And again, this is meant to be a conversation, it's meant to be fun. Inviting those of you who want to and can, you can put things in the chat. You can unmute yourself, participate, and engage in the ways that make you most comfortable. So, one of the things is when you are doing qualitative research, particularly around storytelling, I think and I know it's important that you always offer up your positionality. And part of that is to help the reader understand the lived experiences that you bring to the space, how you're going to interpret the information and the stories and the ways in which you make sense of their stories. And so this image here is for me. If you know me for a half a second, I'm always going to give credit to my grandmother, which is at the top image. She's since passed, but my grandmother was a professor. She taught all grade levels from kindergarten to graduate level. And I grew up with the wonderful experience of being mentored by her in terms of what it meant to be a culturally relevant teacher. And so my positionality is definitely woven into her life. I'm informed by her practices because I grew up watching her as an educator and seeing the differences that she made in her students. At the bottom picture, that was taken with myself and my sister and my dad, and the significant person in the picture is my dad, and how he was a magnificent scientist and mathematician. And he put inside me the love of science and math. And so I was able to take on those things because of the way he introduced science and math, showing it to me in a very natural way all around. And so, again, when we're talking about doing storytelling, one of the things that you lead with is understanding and reflecting on your positionality, particularly when you're in communities that are outside of the communities that you grew up in and that you understand. And so doing so helps you kind of reflect on your biases and recognize the ways in which you are understanding their lived experiences and the stories that they share. And so these boxes here that you see are just reflections of the different identities that I hold and I carry close to me. And those are the things that I always reflect on and think about when I am interpreting or collecting data or analyzing the stories that I receive from people um, that are around me. So I'm going to stop for a second. Any questions about your work? Because before we started, there weren't as many people on at the time. And so I had asked the question, how many of you are used to the practice of doing storytelling within your own research? And so if this is a common practice that you utilize, then great. And feel free to weigh in and share some techniques and strategies that you use in your own work as a storytelling qualitative researcher. Any questions, comments about how you write your positionality statement or what's important to include in your positionality statement?
Or do you adjust your positionality statement based on the particular study?
Absolutely. And part of that again is helping the reader know how you're interpreting and what biases you may bring to that space and help them understand. But you definitely have to tailor it to a particular whatever piece you're writing. I know recently I just submitted a paper and my study was looking at teachers who were in the actual school district that I taught in for 8 years. And so I had to definitely include in my positionality statement that I also taught in that school district because it does make a difference in how I understand the system and what they bring to that space. All right, wonderful folks, you can stop me, tell me to go back. I'm going to continue moving. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of qualitative methods and techniques that can be used when you're doing storytelling. In no particular order, but narrative inquiry, I believe, is like one of the most common types of qualitative storytelling techniques that are used. And in this, you really gather the life stories and the personal experiences that people bring to the space in narrative inquiry. Autoethnography, one of my favorites, is an opportunity for you to share your story. Another way is ethnography, which is a way for you to go into a community and just observe and write about that particular situation that you are observing, that culture that you are experiencing as an outsider, but just looking in and making those observations. So, autoethnography is a wonderful way to kind of get into a community and be able to observe the culture and their experiences through that. Critical and counter storytelling. I know Nicole, when she was introducing, a lot of times there are narratives that we don't hear about people. And so, critical and counter storytelling as a qualitative technique is so important because you don't often hear the voices of communities that are important. And a lot of times their stories are told by other people. And so, this style of qualitative research is important and is often used when you're thinking about telling the different story or having the story told from the people in their own voice and in their own way. And so critical race theory is one way of reaching that counter storytelling approach as well as feminist traditions. And they help to challenge often the dominant narrative that are spoken about certain communities. And then my favorite, well, all of them are my favorite. You have performance and visual storytelling. And I know Nicole mentioned about theater of the oppressed. That is like my special sauce. I love theater of the oppressed because it allows for another way for your participants to engage with you and tell their stories. We're so used to verbally sharing about our stories, but when you do embodied things, and I'm not a theater person, but I've learned to just take on that talent of using theater and art as a way to help people tell their story. And so that's another great way of introducing stories for individuals that typically wouldn't reach that point because it's not easy for them to verbally just outright share it. But when you have an image of some sort, it kind of prompts them to engage in that way. So these are some particular foundations. It's not exhaustive. I just wanted to share some key types of qualitative storytelling methods. Any questions or comments about any of these that I've shared so far? Okay, wonderful folks. Let's move on. So in the next slides, I'm going to share in a little bit more detail the different types that I kind of shared earlier, but there are going to be some differences, not exactly the same four that I shared, and just talk to you a little bit about my use of it, some examples specifically of how I've applied it in my own work, in my research. So, as I shared, is one of the more common types of qualitative research techniques that are used. And particularly, I want to share one of my early pieces that I wrote with two other doctoral students at the time. We were having a conversation and just talking about, as women, how growing up, the different narratives and the different labels that we all held because of our gender and the ways in which society kind of influenced how we. Sorry, everyone, about the interruption in my internet. I'm going to continue on. I was just sharing, and I'm going to continue sharing a little bit about some personal examples of how I've used different types of qualitative techniques. And so I was just sharing about the narrative inquiry and how this is a particular piece of work that I did with two other colleagues at the time. We were grad students in doctoral program. And again, we were just talking about how throughout as women, our identities, how we were labeled and the barriers that we experienced. And we decided to write a paper together. And on this particular study, we were really looking at how our identities transformed over time. And we really understood how, like, the labels that are often given to us, whether you recognize it or not, they really do affect us physically and psychologically. And in a lot of times, it can block the ways in which we engage in certain opportunities. Thankfully, I had a father that spoke louder than the other voices that told me I couldn't do the things that I could do in science education. And so it was his voice that I heard over the other voices. But oftentimes we don't have, or certain people don't have that kind of encouragement to tell them to press forward, even though society at other turns tells you not to. And so we were basically using our stories to explore how we told the ways in which our labels kind of helped us transform and reshape our identities in the ways that we wanted them to go so that we could reach the potentials that we knew that we could reach. And so over to the left, I just kind of share with you some types of methods that are often done when you're doing narrative inquiry. You certainly have interviews. There's a lot of journaling that happens, and you can have field notes where you're just observing the individuals and the things that are taking place. Autoethnography is another type, and I've used this quite a lot in my own work and my writings. This particular example that I'm sharing with you was an experience that I had at a summer research boot camp that was designed for women of color. And it was a residential camp where I was placed in a room, in a dorm room with three other women that I never knew before that time that we came together. And since 2016, 10 years from now, I thought about it as I was preparing for this. We have been like sisters, like we've known each other since birth, and we continue to maintain our relationships. We continue to do research together. And so the autoethnography and our time together in that week-long session of research, we started sharing our stories. We started talking about what it felt like as a Black woman to be in a doctoral program at the institutions that we were all at. We were all in different institutions, and they were predominantly white institutions. And so we were just sharing our stories and what that experience was like and how we were navigating and overcoming systems of oppression and pursuing understanding how difficult it was in the doctoral program. And so it was our storytelling, it was the way we were listening to each other that we recognized some themes that were happening across each of our stories, even though our experiences were not the same. And so autoethnography, again, is an opportunity for you to tell your story. And being part of the minoritized group as a Black woman scientist, that was an opportunity for people to hear my voice. And so the materials and the methods that we used were reflective journals. So every night we would write in our journal. Oftentimes we would have prompts that we used to kind of guide our writing. We also had recorded conversations. We went to our family, we went to our friends, and they were able to fill in gaps at times for things that came out of how they observed our behavior and how they noticed how we were pursuing in spite of. And then it took a lot of memory work and a lot of narrative writing. And so it's interesting. Autoethnography really helps you kind of capture the things that you probably hadn't thought about in years, and you didn't realize that you were affected in the way that you were because of that. And so our piece was Sankofa Sisters, which was an opportunity for us to kind of share how we were pursuing and persevering in spite of the barriers. Oral storytelling and oral history is not something that I've published on or I've used, but it is definitely some type of qualitative technique that I do want to engage in because I see a lot of value in oral storytelling. It's a great way to capture the individual and communities and their histories, the different relationships, particularly if you're doing research in communities where their stories aren't often recognized in the literature. Oral history and oral storytelling could be an awesome way to bring out their stories. And so some of the methods that could be used here is definitely having an in-depth interview where you're one-on-one talking with them with some open-ended questions. A lot of times focus groups can be done, which is another way of getting that collective memory and understanding how their communities are functioning. You can definitely have storytelling circles where you have a particular theme and then everyone speaks to that. And I absolutely love photo elicitation interviews. Something that I tried with you guys at the very beginning with the pictures, crashed and burned, but that's okay. No, I'm joking. Photo elicitation is another good way where you have pictures, but one of the techniques that I've seen people do that I think is even more effective is if they bring pictures. to the space and then use that as a way to talk through their stories. Um, and then you have life history, which I have a lot of knowledge on this. This is what I used for my dissertation. And it was, again, an opportunity for me to work in communities that voices aren't often heard. And in this particular study, I used critical arts-based method. In this case, I used drawing. I was particularly interested in African American educators, science teachers, either in the middle and the secondary school level. And I wanted to understand how they got to be engaged in science because, as I shared earlier, a lot of times I was discouraged to be a science major. I was told to pursue other fields because they didn't think I was smart enough or that I could be successful in that area. And so for me, I was just curious as to understanding how other African Americans like myself engaged in science. How did they develop their interests? How did they pursue it and then become teachers? And then how do they, in turn, encourage other students to become engaged in science and enjoy the field? And so that was the bulk of my study. And I did what we call like a metasage, which was a form of taking their stories and finding historically, culturally, social, politically, like what are the themes that are rising up in each person's story. And it was like literally weaving those things together, the social, the political, the cultural things that are recognized that bubble up in each of the participants' stories that they tell to create this one story. And it was really interesting. It's an interesting piece, and I'd be happy to share more about life histories and metasages because I had no clue what that was. My major professor told me about it, and I've loved it ever since. And so, other methods, you can have definitely one-on-one interviews, which is what I did with my participants at the time. And then focus groups are another good way to get that collective memory and understanding how their experiences were amplified, thinking together as a collective. And as I've shared with you, it was a critical arts-based method technique. Specifically, I used images. I had them draw, which you'll get to see on the next couple of slides here. So that image at the bottom is a product of one of the participants and their image that they drew for that particular piece. So those are the examples that I wanted to share personally. And I'm looking in the chat, seeing if they're, yeah, thank you. So perfect. Are there any questions about any of what I've shared so far up to this point about the foundational pieces of qualitative research, the examples that I've just shared with you? Any wonderings, any curiosities around anything? What time is it in Morocco?
I believe it's 5 p.m.
Ah, long day after work.
And it is Ramadan, so their
That's,
batteries might be getting low.
there you go. Okay.
Yeah. Hi, doctor. Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the biographic
Mhm.
narrative methods. So I have a question, like when you recruit participants, like how many participants you wanted to do? I mean, you wanted to interview or collect the data. So I saw in your research you recruit three three participants in your studies. So can you give me any suggestions?
Wonderful. I'm so glad. I didn't even think about that. There's a big difference between qualitative and quantitative when we think about numbers that are considered representative of what is a good study. And qualitative, you can have one person and it could be sufficient. So there's not a number that represents, oh, well, there's credibility because Lou has used, 20,000. You also have to remember qualitative data is much more extensive than quantitative, and you've got to read line by line. And if you do an hour interview, the data that you get for all of that, that you've got to sift through is a lot. So generally, qualitative researchers, I don't honestly, 12 has been my magic number. I have no reason why that number 12 just jumps out, but I've always decided I don't want to go above 12 because I understand how long it takes to go through the data. And obviously, you can't generalize with all of that information just with those numbers, but at least you're making a contribution based on the information that you've gathered from your study. But for autoethnography, it can be one person and it can be credible, and that's enough. Two people, three. It just depends on the journal type too that you're submitting to. I think they may put, requirements on what they recommend, but for the most part, the numbers just vary on the type of information that you're trying to present. Does that
Perfect.
help?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Appreciate
for your question. I'm glad you brought that up because I totally forgot about that.
it. No
Yeah,
problem. Thank you.
you're welcome. And thank you in the chat, Nicole, 4 to 10, depending on, the data you got to go through is a lot. It's a lot. Not to discourage you, but it's a lot. Any other questions about the different types that we've gone through so far? Recognizing you all are tired and don't feel like you have to turn your video on to make a contribution. You can definitely do so. All right. I now it's time for y'all to work. Yes. All right. So I set up for you a practice activity. And again, this is not to be stressful at all. This is just an opportunity for us to kind of put in practice or at least test out some of the things that you might be wondering about when it comes to practicing or using storytelling. And so I have prepared for you an example using some of my data as a way for us to kind of read through and begin that process of analyzing the data and recognizing that the stories that people tell aren't just anecdotes. I mean, they have a lot of meaning. And a lot of times I get in so much trouble because I try to read into everything that people are saying. And it's just like, I was just talking. Stop trying to analyze everything. And I'm like, but you said this. And so I want us to just have an opportunity to kind of practice. So in this activity, I'm going to present to you an original piece from one of my studies. And I want you to see as we go through it, what are the themes? What are you seeing come up out of the data that I'm going to present to you? And then I want you to think about what are the emotions? What is the context? Where do you see power showing up in that particular space? And then lastly, maybe think about what is being silenced or what is not being said. Well, recognizing that, as I shared, my work really centers on equity and how we give voice to those who often don't have agency, who aren't able to share their points of view, and often their stories are told by other people. So these are some of the things that I want us to kind of look through. And I just have two examples that we're going to run through. And again, let me know if you have questions. So this comes from the piece that I was sharing with you on the life histories, where I had the three African American science teachers. They were middle and secondary school, secondary school teachers, and I was interested in studying how they became engaged in science. How did they learn to love science? And then how, as actual science teachers, how were they helping their students develop and love science? And so what you see here is I had them do a drawing. And the drawing image that you see, I gave them all kind of materials. They could have crayons, I gave them pencils, I gave them glue, scissors, like I gave them all kind of resources that they could choose from, and they were to create an image. The prompt was create an image of a teacher that you think is like the worst teacher. Like you don't want to be this teacher. This is not the ideal teacher at all. And so their exercise was to create an image that represents a teacher that they in their mind is the bad teacher, that is not a good teacher, not ideal. So what you see here is an image of what that person wrote of the ideal not teacher. And what I'm going to read for you is what they shared when they explained, because I asked them to explain their picture to me. And so what I'm going to read to you is their explanation of what they drew. And so this is Ty's data. I think My artifact represents most of the science teachers I had, white male. For whatever reason, they like to have beards. Majority of them wore glasses, couldn't relate to me at all, but not just to me. They couldn't relate to most of the kids that they were teaching. What else? Then some of the words that I wrote, cold, like I don't want to become somebody that was cold or arrogant, condescending, unapproachable, always abstract. It's like they didn't do a good job of taking their ideas and making it real for students, like relating it to their life. They carried too many pens, a lot of them, like just too many. Why do you have all those pens you don't need? There's like 20 in your pocket. So I just shared with you this person's description of their picture, and unfortunately, you can't see clearly the type of the words that are written around, but he has all the different words. As I read, some of them condescending, cold, Western science. So that's what's hovering around them. So my question to you is, thinking about this image here, where do you see the problem? What seems to be the problem that is being described in this picture? Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Robin.
Okay. Hey,
Hi,
Robin.
what I see is not relatable.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And so thinking about how students engage in your class, and if they can't relate or you don't relate with them, it's difficult for them to embrace or engage in the ways that you would want them to. So do you guys see any emotion? What is the emotion or the context, or do you see any power dynamics in this uh, description?
I think that word arrogant stood out to me.
Mhm.
Um, so
Why did arrogant, like, and not condescending or unapproachable? What about that really bothered you?
I think it bothers me because it sort of closes off the learner to not want
Mhm.
to be receptive to what the teacher's talking about or the presenter's talking about. And so
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
one's kind of maybe a trigger for me.
Thank you for sharing. Any others? What is jumping out to you? And one of the things too is, as a qualitative researcher, when you read this type of information that people share with you, you want to understand where they're putting the emphasis on it and how they are making known the things that have really affected them. I giggled when he kept emphasizing the pens, like why so many pens and in his pocket? And, of course, this is not captured in this piece here, but later in the interview, he explained how seeing all those pens, he says, I never wear pens on my, jacket. I don't go around. So there are certain things that because he felt like the person is cold and arrogant and condescending, that really makes him work hard to be warm and kind and approachable. And so these are some of the things that you pull out of the storytelling when you see people bring those things. All right, Lubna, go ahead.
Um, I was thinking whether this, I would say, presumed representation of a professor,
Mm-hmm.
uh, does it feel cold to the students because some of them try to hold on to their image or just how they present themselves to the students rather than focusing on how they need to connect to them and um, create at least that relationship with their students instead of just holding on to their images.
I know. And it's so interesting, Lubna. One of the things that I learned culturally when I went from teaching in the United States to teaching in Ghana for 7 years at an international school, I learned how to open myself up differently to my students when I was in Ghana. Like socializing with my students outside of the classroom was a big thing in Ghana for me. And here in the United States, I don't do that as much as I did in Ghana. And part of that is just the cultural, like how things are brought up. Like I would have dinner at my students' families' homes during the week. And so I got to connect with them differently. And so when you say like the image that you present, it just depends on how you are taught in your teacher education programs to relate to your students. Like the idea of letting students ride in your car or you do things like outside of the classroom is not really encouraged because of safety reasons, legal reasons, and reasons that make sense. But again, it just really depends on how you are taught to engage with your students.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about this piece here in the comments that the person is providing, thinking about power? Do you definitely see power differences where a student might feel like they're disempowered, they don't have agency, or they can't really speak out about certain things?
I was kind of seeing this as an opportunity for Ty to take back power right now, being pretty critical of the teachers in a place where they can't push back, I think is a way.
Mhm. And one of the beautiful things about storytelling is you allow the individual to go back and remember things that they didn't necessarily realize was impacting their life as much as it does. And all of my participants at some point in the interview got extremely emotional in crying because they said, I have not thought about this at all. And thinking about this really makes sense to why I'm the way I am as a teacher today and why I do the things that I do. So, storytelling is, it's not therapy, but I like to think that it allows a person to kind of go back and retrace the things that happened and be able to recognize why they do the things that they do today. All right, I'm going to go to the last and final example. Um, This picture I loved, I loved, I loved. It's like a comic strip. And again, this was asking the participant to demonstrate what they believe a teacher who doesn't have good teaching practices. This is the type of science teacher that they don't ever want to be. And so this image here is representing for that particular participant, uh, some teacher, science teacher that's not a good teacher. And so Keisha says, I have two pictures that refer to two scenarios that I think of as teachers I don't want to be. The teacher who actually is in the room, but not mentally or academically present because they're distracted with their own task. In the end, the teacher who is literally not in the room for a variety of reasons, typically because they're avoiding teaching. And then I have a list of characteristics that to me describe teachers that I definitely don't ever want to become. A teacher who doesn't care about kids or their improvement. The teacher who is in inappropriate relationships with students. The teacher who's trying to be popular by befriending the students. The teacher who lacks classroom management. And then the teacher who's just there because it's a great schedule as far as off time. And so here you have the image that the person drew and then the description that they gave of what was happening in that particular picture, which I thought was extremely powerful when you think about storytelling and the opportunity to have them draw and then interpret what they've drawn for you. And a lot of times you get way more rich data out of them because you've allowed them to exercise a different way of reflecting and thinking about the things that influence and affect them as individuals. So again, I want to ask, thinking about what you've just seen here, what do you think the problem is, or what's the tension in this particular description that the person writes about the ideal science teacher not? Does anything come to mind? Are you reminded of certain things that you've experienced in your own education coming up as a learner, or even thinking about in your current practice as a teacher, some of the things that you witnessed or observed?
This makes me think of something I read a long time ago that was James Comer talking about relationships and that students don't care what you know until they know that you care.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And that you could have all of the knowledge in the world, but if you can't connect
mm-hmm,
on in ways that matter to students,
mm-hmm.
your knowledge makes no difference in the classroom.
Definitely.
And connecting means building relationships in the ways that work, with and for them, which is really hard because in the pre-service world, a lot of our students haven't had a lot of life experience to bring with them about
Mm-hmm,
about how to do that with
mm-hmm.
people who come from different backgrounds than they do.
Definitely.
So
Thank you for that. Thank you. I don't know about you, everyone here, but when I looked at the picture, before she even described and explained it to me, one of the things that really stood out to me was the present teacher with no mental or academic presence, and just the students sleeping, on the table. That to me was powerful, particularly thinking about, how that looks in a classroom where you do have situations where you see students disengage. But again, going back to the positionality of what I shared earlier, being careful that you're reflecting and not imposing your particular biases, I could easily read this in so many ways because of my lived experiences, being almost invisible to some of the teachers in the classroom because I wasn't seen as important. And so, how do I remove myself, like as Nicole said, like, how do I keep from making those inferences? Because they're my experiences. And that's how I see the data. And so, it's extremely difficult. That's why you have to have opportunities to show different ways that you've collected data so you can triangulate it and make sure that there's consistency across how you're seeing and understanding the data. So there's a lot of work that goes into qualitative research, which is why you don't need like a gazillion people in your study because you're going to be busy trying to cross analyze different things. All right, wonderful folks. Y'all didn't like this picture? Okay, fine. We're going to move on. And we're getting to the end, and I just kind of want to kind of pull back and bring together and reconnect with the things that we've talked about so far, which discussion prompts here. I want to make sure that everybody is clear. And again, I know that there's certain expertise that's already present in this space, and I invite that expertise to unmute and share your experiences, your strategies around qualitative research, things that have worked for you in the past and continue to work. And so, one of the first questions is I want to know, in your opinion, what makes a story qualitative? Like, at the very basic level, how do you know that this is a qualitative study or a qualitative data?
I think about having some predefined structure beforehand, so it's not just totally open, that you have a research question or research aim and some structure so that you're collecting data
Mm-hmm.
um, in ways that are consistent for that triangulation you're talking about later.
Definitely. And one of the things that got me in the early stages of understanding what qualitative research was, a lot of times people mix like surveys as a way of saying, okay, this is qualitative data. And it can be to some extent, but it depends on how the survey is written. Like, are they open-ended questions that you're presenting to the individual for them to respond to? But when you start getting into the numerical, like you're trying to find the frequency and how often people are saying this and the quantity, when you start getting into the numbers aspect, not that you won't have number representation of like data, so many people said this and that, but truly qualitative data is someone's story. It's rich data, it's description, it's the things that numbers can't tell you. Like, so what? Like 75% of the students pass the exam, but you need to know like what was going on, what informed, how did they prepare for the exam. It's that kind of data that you get from the individual that tells you how they got to that really makes it qualitative data. So it's where you get their feelings, what motivates them, insights into their thoughts. That's the difference. It's the why they did it, and it's the how. And it's not necessarily how you count or frequency. That gets into the quantitative piece of it. So a story that gives you the rich data is what we consider qualitative. And then the last thing that I want to just talk about is how do our positionalities shape? And I've kind of spoken and referred to it as I went along. But again, positionality is key. As someone who reads other people's research that is considered qualitative, that's one of the first things that I kind of go to because I want to understand the person that's writing this. And it definitely helps me understand when I read their findings. And I'm like, okay, I understand how they came to that conclusion because they've shared their positionality with me. I understand that they've lived in this community, that they bring this lens to the space. Um, and so those things are extremely important. So for me, your positionalities really help influence or inform how you see the information. All right. Any questions or comments or wonderings about what I've shared so far? Okay, let's see. All right. Well, I am providing you my information, and I recognize that this is the end of Ramadan coming up soon, and I recognize that energy levels are low. I lived in Ghana for 7 years, and I could not understand how my students were functioning in that hot, hot heat, but I admired them. And as a result, I learned with my students to also fast because my students taught me that they're my friends and how can I eat or drink in front of them. And so I definitely appreciate and respect and understand your situation. And so if something comes up, later, here's my contact information. I also put my WhatsApp information there. I do use WhatsApp quite a lot. And so I just ask that you just put your name, tell me who you are. I don't say, what are you doing? No, creepy. I will I will not answer you. But if you kind of give me your name, definitely I will respond. And I look forward to hearing from you if that's the case. So, Lovna, yes.
Excuse me, I just have a question about bias concerning these dealing with these types of data, which is
Mhm,
qualitative data. So, assuming that your positionality within um, the data, for
mhm,
example, if you if you are I would say a member of the community you're
mhm,
conducting a research on, and you're trying to interpret data
mhm.
along the way, how is it how can you like exclude yourself from from the process, because it's almost it's a little hard, and
And
at the same time you're trying to keep it as authentic as it could be,
mhm.
but at the same time you try to add something.
Right, right.
And I think that's the tricky part, especially when you feel like you're involved in it. So how can you, is there a way to possibly maintain a point of neutrality within while doing this and interpreting the data?
So a couple of things that you do in your piece, you write it as a limitation that
Mm-hmm.
you come from the same community, and that because of that, you might have certain perspectives that aren't necessarily authentic to that community, but because you belong to that community, you're sharing. It also can be a strength as well, being from that community where you have a relationship and you understand the dynamics and the system and how to work in that space. But I always list it under as a limitation because a lot of times I am the sole researcher. I am the one that's creating the curriculum. And I make sure I list all of those things in my write-up as a limitation that could possibly influence how my participants engage with me and how I interpret their information. So you can't work, I mean, you can't avoid it because it's going to happen in some sense, but you acknowledge it is what you have to do.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tara. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I hope you all have a good evening. And thank you, Tanya and Nicole, and for having me for today.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
Please, for participants, complete the survey. We dropped the link in the chat. We'd love to have your feedback. And we hope everybody has a lovely evening.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.